This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Right On, showcasing the work of Otago Southland writers. I'm Beverly Martens. Join me for news and interviews with local writers on the second Wednesday of every month from noon till 1 and replayed the following Sunday at 1 p.m. Right On is brought to you by the Otago Southland branch of the New Zealand Society of Authors and kindly supported by the great team at the University Bookshop.
What do you want to be when you grow up? They say you are what you read, and the University Bookshop can help you be whoever you want to be. Do you want to be an athlete? Then sit down with an inspiring sports biography. Do you fancy yourself as a detective? We have a grisly lineup of murder mysteries waiting just for you. Do you aspire to be the world's greatest chef? We have cookbooks to tantalise your taste buds. Do you want to celebrate your inner child? Play up in our fabulous children's room. The University Bookshop, helping you decide what you want to be when you grow up.
Hello and welcome to Right On, the Otago Southland branch of the New Zealand Society of Authors monthly show all about writers and writing. And because we're so close to Valentine's Day, I've decided to make this show all about romance, specifically romance writers. And I thought it would be really interesting to contrast New Zealand romance writing today with romance writing of the last century. And no, I'm not talking about Jane Austen, something much closer to home, 50s and 60s romance writing here in New Zealand. So, with that in mind, I've got two terrific interviews lined up. Firstly, I'm going to speak with the daughter of New Zealand's Queen of Romance writing back then, Essie Summers, who wrote over 50 Mills and Boon romances back in the day, many of them set right here in Otago. And then in the second half of the show, I'm going to chat with contemporary rural romance writer Danielle Hawkins, who's coming in loud and clear from the King Country. So let's crack into it, because they're both compelling conversations, and I'm sure you'd rather hear from them, not me. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make our February show all about romance, and I just feel we can't talk about romance and romance writing without paying homage to someone who was regarded as the queen of romance writing in New Zealand, and that was the lovely Essie Summers. Now, I'm sure most of you know who Essie Summers was, but for those of you who don't, I'm going to give you a very quick snapshot, and you'll then understand how important she is in the sort of canon of New Zealand writing. So we're talking 56 novels that she wrote over a 40-year period. All but 4 of them were published by Mills and Boon, so she had that international standing. 19 million copies sold in 105 countries and read and translated into 25 languages. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Her main kind of writing period was from about 1957 to just the year before she died, 1997. So you're talking 2 books a year on average for 40 years. I mean, that is incredible. But of course, there was so much more to Essie. She was also a minister's wife in very busy parishes, and she was a mother of 2, and I'm very delighted now to welcome her daughter, Liz Jack, to talk about Essie.
Good morning, Beverly. Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. And she's not difficult to talk about.
No, you've done that quite a lot over the years, haven't you?
Quite a delight.
Yeah.
I have.
Oh, yeah. Well, she sounds a delightful character. So, what recollections do you have of your mum in terms of her being a writer? Like, when did you sort of become aware that she was sort of more than your mother, as it were?
Well, quite early on, although at the stage I'm going to talk about, I would have regarded it as perhaps what a lot of people did. But my earliest memories are when we were in the Western period of my life, which was quite a magical place to grow up in North Otago. And I remember quite often waking up to the clackety-clack-clack of the old typewriter, which of course wasn't old then, but that was the technology.
No, but it was a very physical instrument, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I would just go happily back to sleep. Mum was at her typewriter, all was well with the world. And
you're talking about her getting up at 5 a.m. to sort of do that.
Yes, and it was later that when I was a bit older, and looking back now, of course, I know for a fact that she did get up at 5 in the morning, and those were her wonderful couple, 2 or 3 hours that she loved, because it was before the phone started ringing and before she had to get the kids to school and all that sort of thing. And she was very disciplined with her writing schedules, but I did that would be when it first started to impinge. And then by the time I was her first book was accepted, and it had been quite a mission. She was spending long hours and rewriting lots of it, and for Boon, and she was just on the cusp of getting published. So that was an exciting time, and I do remember that because I was 12. And I was just at the age where I was starting to move from, children's books into adult, and it was wonderful because I could read them hot off the press. As like in my late, by the time we were in Dunedin, we shifted down when I was 14, and by then she was getting well established. And I can remember times when I'd stand behind her at the typewriter and say, "Hurry up! I've finished that chapter. I want the next one." And
talk about write on demand.
Yes, and so that was when I did start to realise that she was that it was a real career.
And what about your classmates and sort of people around you? Did they realise? Because I always got the impression, reading her autobiography, the Essie Summers story, but also just generally, that she was quite modest.
She was very modest, yes. Talking about my classmates, I remember my friends at Otago Girls High School teasing me like mad over her first book, New Zealand Inheritance, it came out as. And there was a nude scene in it, would you believe? It was very mild. Yeah. It was just simply the heroine from a distance coming upon the hero swimming naked in the Waimakere, I think it was, river. But they gave me heaps about it. That was hilarious. And the other aspect of that was this teacher, my English teacher, when I was in year 11, Miss Hendry, stopped me in the corridor one day, and I thought I was going to be in trouble over uniform or something. And she said, "Oh, Elizabeth, I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed your mother's latest book." And I was quite horrified. I thought, she would only be reading the classics. What was she doing reading Mills and Boon? So, yes, those things did bring it home to me that, she was successful. She was, and this was her life, or a huge part of her life.
And I know that in terms of her, writing success, why she was so successful was that she believed in what she wrote.
Absolutely, yes.
And she did meticulous research, didn't she?
Yes, she did. She would research a book for 2 or 3 months before she actually started writing it, and she would be doing that while she had her current book on the go. I never knew how she did that.
No, in terms of keeping your head clear.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that was where all the jottings came in, where she would jot things down, and it would be about often not the book she was writing, but the one that was forming in her head. But she did set a lot of time aside to research, and she did find the Dunedin librarian of the day. Now, what was her name? She did just die recently, but she was absolutely wonderful help. So, Mum used what she could in those, because there was no internet, of course, and she would never write about an area that she hadn't been to. There was only one exception to that. It was her second novel, Bachelor's Galore.
I love that book, and I love the title too. But you're right, there's a travel. There's the ship's coming out to New Zealand, because I remember the heroine being, and I can't remember the reasons why, but she stuffs her ball gown out the porthole.
That's right.
I remember at one point.
Yes,
which was very funny.
Yes, well, she was only able to write that one because my dad had he was from England originally, and he had been back there on a trip in 1953 before she had any books published. But he had all his diaries. So she was able to use
them as a resource.
Yes, to make sure that she didn't stuff up.
Yeah.
Because at that stage she hadn't had the opportunity to travel at all.
Now, this makes me think that every Sunday drive or visiting relatives or whatever the family went on, was Essie always kind of, observing out the window and noting things down?
It was always grist to the mill. That would be what she would say. It was grist to the mill. And she would say even walking along a Dunedin street and stopping at the lights, and she would hear interesting snippets of conversation, and she'd think, oh, yeah, and things like that. But yes, it was actually, it's funny that you should mention that, because Mondays, I remember that Mondays were their day off because of Dad being a minister.
Yeah,
and
that was
so often.
Yeah, they tried to really protect that day,
yes,
didn't
and
they?
They would just pack a picnic lunch, go off somewhere, and Dad was an amateur artist and he would sketch and Mum would write. And that's another distinct memory of my childhood.
Yeah, but isn't that a lovely image of them?
Yes,
I think that because they seemed such a partnership.
Oh, they were.
Yeah.
They were fantastic.
Yeah.
Dad was right behind Mum all the way with her writing. He believed in it as much as she did, which was great.
And she had notebooks everywhere, didn't she?
Yes.
In the car, by the kitchen sink, even in the garden, or she'd take one out
That's
there
right.
or something.
She always had it, because if she didn't jot it down, she would say, well, it gets overlaid by other things and you forget that moment, that spark. Dad used to complain that sometimes it was in the middle of the night.
And sometimes
it might be disturbed.
Was potentially even in church.
Yes, she did, and I found that very embarrassing as a child.
Just popping a wee note down there.
Yes.
No, I think it's really funny. But you see, that would give the impression, if it was someone else, not your mum, of the sort of absent-minded professor. But she was obviously present, as it were, as well.
Yes, she could be.
She was very warm and kind. Oh, well, could she be?
Yes, one or two incidents in her autobiography which are fun to read. Where her mind was completely on, the book and not where she actually was. But no, she was pretty practical, and it was the way she'd been brought up.
Right, so she wasn't sticking stuff in the oven and, because I know Hone Tūwhare was notorious for putting a pie in the oven, going back to his writing and then being alerted by the smell of smoke.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. Well, you can very much imagine that happening, can't you? Yes. But no, she was pretty practical. Well, she did get caught out on a few things probably, but similar to that probably. But putting tea in the coffee percolator and things like that, not too catastrophic. But the key thing about Mum's writing was that she was so organised. So when she was on the book, she would have the hours in the morning, the hours in the afternoon, and tried not to let stuff get in to upset that, although... Did
you have to sort of creep into the house after school then? Is that what you're saying? Or
No, I don't. I don't recall that. We probably wouldn't have respected her privacy that much, especially in Preston Crescent, where... in Balnow's, where she just had the little front porch as her...
She was on show.
And we would bowl in, as kids do. It's all about them, isn't it?
Yeah, neighbours would walk past and wave.
Yes. And then there was the time when she, at one stage, we had both my grandmothers living with us, and one had dementia for years. And Mum managed to get a book typed, but I don't know how she did it, where Gran was sitting on the sofa behind her with her knitting, but every time the typewriter got to the bell at the end of the line, Gran would jump and say, "Oh, that's the door, Essie. Oh, that's the door, Essie." So, yes, concentration was a bit difficult with things like that, but she coped.
And also just the role as a minister's wife, because there is a whole lot of hospitality in that, isn't there?
Yes, for sure.
Well,
always meetings, evening meetings at the manse.
Yeah.
Mum did loads of baking.
I was just going to say that.
Which
they always went together,
down
didn't
on
they?
After school, and then you'd have to do another batch.
Now we're lucky if someone buys a packet of biscuits on the way, but then it was all home baking, wasn't it? Which is, very time-consuming, wasn't it?
But she was very much a people person, Beverly. So she absolutely... One of the main things about Mum was that she just loved people. And sometimes it could be quite frustrating because you'd be being negative about someone, which I know we shouldn't, but Mum would always find something redeeming about them. But she did love people, and so the minister's wife thing fitted her to a T, really.
Right.
Yes, she enjoyed those years.
And I have read and enjoyed How Sweet Are the Ways, which is set in Outram, because that's my favourite Essie book, and I believe it was hers too, because it's the closest to her own life as the character.
It's mine
being
too.
And
to me, it's
wife.
like Western. It's like the Western Sleepy Hollow village that we grew up in.
Yeah.
Yes. But you're right. That was the setting.
But there's also that good equality between the hero and the heroine, isn't there? Like they're always matched from sort of intelligence point of view, and also in terms of her writing formula, and I'm using that in inverted commas, but her romance has always featured strong charactered heroines. They were brave, they were caring, they were intelligent, but cleverly, because most of them married heroes with farms, because so many of them were set in rural New Zealand, because farmers kind of ruled the world and in the economy of those times. They continued to work after marriage and children, didn't they? Because you do if you're a farmer's wife, because there's all the feeding all the labourers and the different seasons and the different jobs and things. So by doing that, she kind of sidestepped the social convention of the time for women, because basically back then when you got married, you resigned from your job, and in fact that you sort of did that too, didn't you? In that you resigned from teaching when you got married yourself.
And I gave up my sport, which I was playing to a reasonably high level. But I did that because there were children involved straight away, because I married a widower with 3 children.
Oh, right.
And then we had a child of our own a couple of years later. So and I also loved
your late
farm
husband
life.
Bob, isn't it? Bob
Yes,
Jack.
yes. So that was a decision at that time that was a personal thing. I think by the time I married, I was 32, and I think many women were carrying on with their careers. But I felt, I'd had a good career. I did go back to it later.
You did relief teaching and things once the children were old.
I got right back into it, and I was deputy principal at the high school for the last 15 years. And Mum loved that. But that was, I think, yes, by the time I married, I could have made a decision to carry on teaching, but I felt that the children needed, the mother in the home. And, of course, there was plenty to do on the farm.
And
I just loved it.
And you were doing voluntary. I mean, you were on the board at the school. And,
That's true,
yes. And other things too.
Like
so,
yes.
I mean, it was just
you get
as
involved
busy.
in the things that your kids are doing at school and so on, a different way. Yes.
Have you ever sort of thought of this? Because this is something that struck me, that actually this is kind of art imitating life, imitating art, in the sense that you were actually, you could have been one of the heroines in your mother's story.
Oh. Well,
in terms of your life path.
that's something to ponder. But that's just made me remember. You see, the children at Aotearoa High School in Milton, in the early days of my teaching, the girls all knew that Miss Flett, as I was then, that her mother was this writer. They were all reading her books.
Were they?
Yes, much to the consternation of the head of the English department, who wanted them to be reading Jane Austen, etc.
But then Jane Austen's stories are not so different, are they? They're just set in a different time, aren't they?
But one year, I went back home in the weekend and said to Mum, the first thing I said as I got in the door is, "What have you said in your latest book?" Because all the kids think that I'm the heroine. So Mum and I looked through the book, and all we could find was one reference where it said that the heroine had thought of being a teacher and would have loved to teach in a co-ed school, where she could coach cricket and so on with the boys. So all the kids then, the girls, definitely thought that I was the heroine, which I wasn't.
But you were an Otago rep cricketer, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And that was quite unusual. And I think you started a girls' cricket team.
Yes, several times actually during my career. Yes.
Which
took the
was
boys
less
to
usual.
play Bayfield one year, and a Bayfield boy came up and said, "Now tell me, what do the boys think about having a lady coach?" I said, "Well, you'll have to go and ask them." So it was reasonably unusual back then, I suppose.
And the other sort of secret of Essie's success or her popularity was how revered and almost a character in the books was the New Zealand landscape.
Yes.
She would describe it in I mean, I don't mean flowery, sort of Yeats kind of way, but she would always incorporate it, and the setting was really important, and she'd done her research and everything, so much so that she became a kind of a one-woman travel industry advocate, in that people from overseas would read her books and then want to come to New Zealand. I think I read a lovely description where I think it was an American fan said, before I read Essie Summers, New Zealand was just a squiggle on the map.
A squiggle on the map, yes.
And then I read it and wanted to come out here, and lots of people did. And this is, be aware, this is 50 years before Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings kind of created that sort of wave of tourism. And so much so that she was actually offered an MBE for her services to tourism, and she turned it down.
Yes.
And I think, am I right in thinking that was because it wasn't services to writing?
No, it wasn't that at all. And Dad and Bill and myself was so disappointed when she didn't accept it. By the way, that sort of thing is never supposed to get out. You're not supposed to be offered an honour and then say, I turned it down. Right. But we don't know. Yeah. Somehow or other it escaped. And anyway, so that's okay. But she just said, well, I can tie that in with what you said about the tourism, actually, because to Mum that was a huge bonus that she never expected from writing, and because she loved New Zealand so much, she was so gratified at the numbers that did come because of her writing. And she had a massive fan base and had wonderful letters from people. And so she turned it down because she said, no, the writing has been absolutely marvellous, what I've always wanted to do. The tourism aspect, the tourists coming, has been such a bonus, something I would never have expected.
But it was like a secondary
thing. She said,
thing.
it's not me,
Yeah.
an honour,
Yeah.
it's not me,
Right.
and I remember her saying, and it's just not me, let's just leave it at that.
Right. Now, speaking of honours, let's talk about the long overdue plaque unveiling for her back in May 2021. For listeners that don't know, there's the Dunedin Writers' Walk in the Octagon, which has lots of brass plaques in it, and of course it's always incomplete. People get missed, the usual suspects are there, but there's always a case for more. And this is what happened with your mum, is that there was kind of a push for her to be recognised because it's quite literary, that walk, and romance might not have been quite considered on the same plane as it, but fortunately people got over that, and back then they had a plaque unveiling for Essie, and it's right there at the feet of Robbie Burns' statue, which is lovely because I know your mum was a big fan of Robbie Burns, wasn't she?
Yes, she quoted him so often, and often in her books she would have the characters turning up into Stewart Street, going past the Robbie Burns statue. She mentioned him so often. And yes, this is the one thing I just so dearly wish I could tell Mum. She wouldn't believe it.
That she's there.
But that she's there,
and
that,
very
right
good,
there.
and brilliant company, because Janet Frame's just,
exactly.
just right beside her, as it were.
It's a wonderful honour.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was very pleased to see that, and that was a lovely day and a lovely event, and we had a cup of tea and talks from you and other family members afterwards, didn't we, at the library? Yes,
it was marvellous, and there was a wonderful exhibition of her writing career. So, no, it was fabulous. Dunedin Library did her proud, and the Friends of the Library group who
Ruth Williamson was a real driver for it, wasn't she?
Champion.
Yeah. And Nikki Page, of course.
It was just fabulous. And that had all come out of the blue by one of the wonderful writers for the ODT supplement on Saturdays. I can't remember his name. He's still one of their major writers, and he just rang me one day.
Was it Bruce Monroe?
It was.
Yeah.
Well done. Yes, Bruce. And he interviewed me over the telephone about Mum's writing, and then just completely out of the blue, and then brought up about, did I think there should be a plaque, or was it sort of intellectual snobbery and so on? And I said, well, that's not for me to decide. But that all sprang from there. It wasn't a family push or anything. It was from those people we've mentioned, really.
Now, talk along those lines of making Essie sort of more accessible to modern, readers. Some 25 years since she's passed, is we were just talking off air, and I was sort of asking what's happened to her papers and all those kinds of things. And you were telling me, well, one, we know that a lot of them are down at the Hocken. You've got some sort of journals and things that have got a mixture of her own words, diarying, notes, poems, all sorts of things. Because, of course, she was quite the poet before she became a novelist. And you're saying that they will eventually make their way to the Hocken. But also, can you just do a quick recap of what you're telling me about her books being available on like Amazon and things now through a connection in the States?
Yes, well, there's an American gentleman from Houston, Texas. He's a graduate of Princeton, and so I was flabbergasted to receive an email out of the blue from him. To cut a long story short, he had fallen in love with Essie's books at the age of 11 because his grandmother had Mills and Boons and all of Essie's, and as a boy on holiday, he's an avid reader, and he'd be searching for something extra to read, and there were all these jolly romances. But when he found Mums, he fell in love with New Zealand. So here we go again with that theme. And he loved her literary, and still does, the number of times she's quoting from literature, and he loved her New Zealand descriptions and so on, apart from the characters. So anyway, he approached my brother and I, asking what he wanted to do, and it's been very successful. He wanted to republish Mum's books, but as e-books through Amazon, so that the young women who wouldn't have access to them now could. And his feeling was that they were wholesome books, and but he loved all the as I said, the background and the literary allusions and so on as well. So he has been doing that, and so far I think almost up to about 20 of her books have been up on Amazon, and they're selling very well. And he adds to the book by putting in forewords and afterwords. He goes into a lot of analysis. And I suppose when you buy the book, if you really absolutely love that sort of thing, well, it's a wonderful bonus.
Because you're getting the context.
Yes,
of the
and
story.
he always sends it through to us to proofread and check for, especially like mistakes that he wouldn't know in terms of his American background as opposed to New Zealand. but also I find them fascinating reads. And he also, one of the more recent projects has been to put out her autobiography updated. So we did Bill and I did a short update from, I think it was 1974 it was printed.
Right.
So we did that to her death,
last
of course.
Years. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he asked for photos, so I sent over a heap thinking he'd choose 2 or 3, and he put in an enormous number of photos. So that's rather lovely.
Yeah.
For us personally anyway, and hopefully of some interest to readers.
It's kind of, as you say, it's brought everything up to date, both in terms of her story, but that lovely intersection with technology.
Yes, exactly, and something that we would never have thought of.
Or had the skill set for.
Well, exactly.
Who does?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was very good because he wondered if we had ever thought of doing that and would he be stepping on our toes. And we said, no, go for it. Now, that reminded me of something. What was I going to mention there? Yes, one lovely thing I'll mention too about his work. He has a very talented son. He's got quite a very large family actually, and this particular son does the covers. And my son, Andrew, is a graphic designer, and he designs the cover. So it's that lovely family connection.
Yes,
I think
on both
Essie would love that.
Yes, she would.
Think that
I'm
was
sure
great.
she would.
Yes.
Isn't that excellent? Well, Liz, could talk to you all morning. Lovely to. I really appreciate you coming in. I know that you've retired now and are living here on the Otago Peninsula, and so great to bring Essie back to life. And also, what a lovely contrast, because I'm going to be talking to my second guest, who's a modern romance writer, and it'd be interesting to sort of compare and contrast the difference of what goes in books now and then.
Sounds wonderful, and there are some very successful New Zealand romantic writers.
The genre
amazingly.
The genre is alive and well.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you, Beverly. It's been a pleasure.
Wasn't that charming? Now let's have a very short musical break before my next guest, Danielle Hawkins. Welcome to the show, Danielle, zooming all the way in from the King Country. Now, you've written 5 novels to date, as well as your sort of year in the life memoir, all pretty much set kind of certainly in the country and kind of around the area that you live. And that was deliberate, wasn't it? You didn't want your characters to be sort of working in the city, working at glossy magazines, having the cocktails after work till all the wee small hours, that kind of life. You didn't want that life for your characters, did you?
Well, no, but mostly because I don't know anything about it. and I'm sure I couldn't write it convincingly. So
you definitely draw on your own life, your own experiences, your own upbringing, because it is very rurally based, isn't it? Everything to date. Yeah. And also I read somewhere that you said something about that you kind of wanted to rectify the balance a little bit, in the sense that not everyone in the country is a hick. I think there was a very funny quote of, you're not sitting there on the porch with a shotgun between your knees. You really want to show how real your characters are, what the challenges are of rural life, and how it's all about kind of getting stuck in.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And also, of course, you're a vet, large animal vet, and sort of drawing on some of those experiences too. Your memoir too, your sort of it's more of a sort of year in the life of, isn't it? 2 Shakes of a Lamb's Tail. Now, that's not all about lambs gambling in the daffodils either.
No.
You've got very challenging kind of cases, as it were, dealing with the large animals, and also kind of some quite challenging clients and things like that. How do you make that transition from your sort of real life experiences into fiction?
Well, basically, anything that happens, you zhuzh it up a little bit and stick it in. So it's blatant copying of any funny things that neighbours and friends and stuff say, and yeah,
because you've got.
I've never been very plot driven. It's more sort of characters and things that they're doing. So if we happen to be sharing, then probably they'll be sharing next day in the book, just because that's easy and it's lazy, I suppose.
Oh, I don't think it's lazy, because I think you're a really good observationist of character. I think your characters are incredibly well developed. And I also think a couple of things I really love about your writing. One is tone. You sort of seem to get the tone just right, and that it's really easy to read and that you understand the tone of what people are saying. Because I know one of your sort of pet hates is that the sort of explanatory adverbs, and that used to go on quite a bit in romance writing, didn't it? She said, or he said usually, he said tersely, she said excitedly. They're not in. There's very few adverbs in your books, isn't there?
Well, there are now, but you should have seen the edits for my first manuscript. I had the nicest editor in the world, and she wrote all sorts of lovely compliments, and then she sent me, I think it was 2 A4 pages on both sides of all the words I overused.
Oh.
And it was absolutely like that. It was excitedly and cheerfully and tersely and yeah.
So they've gone as much as possible now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a nice quote that Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, his what's the word I want? Sort of recipe for whether a manuscript is going to be any good and whether it will turn into a book. Well, first of all, you go through it and take out all of the adjectives, and then you see whether it's any good.
Right. And
it really is true.
Yeah, Roger Hall, I did a great sort of master workshop with Roger Hall once, more about playwriting, but he said the same thing about books. He said, just throw me a book and look at it and just open it, and if it's kind of all prose, that's not very good either, because it has to be a lot of, dialogue is often what reveals character and moves things along. Of course it does in a play, because that's what you got. But that was his sort of thing too, that often he could look at a book and...
that old show don't tell
thing. Yeah, absolutely. Also, because, I was brought up in a town that was at that time about the same size as Aotearoa, which is Alexandra in central Otago.
Oh, cool.
And so, of course, I can relate to sort of those, the men that are much more action than words, the men that feel like they say something once a fortnight. And I just really love that in your work, like in sort of things like Pretty Delicious Cafe, where, a man's much more likely to bring you something from the bakery than they are a bunch of flowers, yeah?
I would much rather have something from the bakery, personally.
Is that sort of something that do you think that's, because my I'm a bit older than you, and I wonder if is my view of sort of rural men dated, or do you think that's still quite applicable in terms of?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I'm getting pretty old too, so it probably is a bit dated. My brother-in-law is a sheep farmer, and they've got a big farm, and he's tough as anything, and he's a total foodie, and he rushes home and like he's ordered a little caramelizer thing for creme brulees from eBay, and it's very exciting and it's cool.
So he could, yeah. So he's a metrosexual then, you think?
Absolutely.
Right. So what do you? I mean, it's hard to talk about and analyse your own kind of body of work or something. But what do you think is the sort of your recipe for success? Because your books are doing really well.
Well, I'm not sure that they are. It's a tricky question. I don't think trying to write something that will be a success will ever work, because
you'll never catch the wave.
That's right, exactly. By the time that it's got cool, you've got 18 months behind by the time it gets published. Mm-hmm. So all I've ever been able to do is muck around with it until I like it, and hope that it appeals to someone else too. Right.
So if it interests and excites or amuses you, then that's when kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course that's not going to appeal to everybody, but it's more fun to do it that way. And I don't think any recipe works, so you may as well do one that's fun.
Oh, I agree, and that's I've been doing this for about a year, and that's completely my ethos for the show too. Is if it interests or excites me, then I think you bring more enthusiasm to it, and therefore it'll appeal to people because of that. So let's talk about your writing practice. I read that that you do kind of 2 days a week of your veterinary work and 3 days a week of writing while the kids are at school. Now that's the lovely theory of it. That's probably not how it plays out in practice, is it?
No, that's probably a little bit dated now. So I'm working 3 days and helping with farming stuff for the rest of the week. And so I've fallen into a get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, right till 7, 15, when everyone else gets up, and put it away and
get
look
on
at
with
it again.
Family life sort of thing.
Yeah, which is not really enough time to devote to it. But never mind, that's what has to happen.
That's just real life. And actually you do have that in common with talking about the first interviewee on the show, which talking about Essie Summers, who was writing back in the 50s and 60s, and her kids remember the clack. Well, then it was the physical clack 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 of the typewriter, but that often she had to do it before her day started. Otherwise, it kind of wouldn't happen. But is it easier now because your kids are teenagers now, aren't they? Does that make life easier or not for your writing?
Oh, it's much easier, because when they're little, you have to tiptoe out, and as soon as you drop, a pin, then they're beside you.
Yeah,
exactly.
Mum,
and now I can't wake them up at all. So
right. Being that age now, have they sort of read your books now, and has there been any squirming, or are they, what's been their reaction?
They all read the memoir one, and they were all tickled because they liked being in a book.
Yep.
And apart from that, Catherine, my daughter, has read the latest one that came out and quite liked it, but shows no interest whatsoever in reading the backlog.
Right, so they don't.
And my husband never reads anything that I write.
Yeah, so that but I knew. So do the kids get, does anyone come up to them at school, or are they aware of your sort of life beyond mum?
Yes, yeah. I mean, not that they're getting stopped in the street or anything, but yeah, they'll have teachers who say, "Oh, that's your mum, and I like her books," and yeah.
Right. Now, let's go now and talk about kind of sort of the memoir thing. Was that harder or sort of easier to write?
It was much easier because I didn't have to think about the story arc at all. I just got up in the morning and wrote down more or less what happened yesterday, making it a bit more interesting and inserting the odd nasty character for more drama
and a wee bit of revenge, possibly. Did you? So you didn't keep journals or anything? Do you keep journals?
No, I never have.
Right.
So I am pleased to have done that because it is. Although some of that book isn't true, it has got enough about what we did from day to day to
actually be a great resource for the family later too, and for you to look back on and things like that. Yeah, brilliant. Because I also read somewhere that you you do like that contrast between your work and your writing, because lots of people don't appreciate how sort of isolating writing is, isn't it? So it can be quite socially isolating. Have you found that?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes, and I don't think it would be very good for my mental health to do it full time. Far too navel gazy. You need to get out and have to socialise with people a bit.
So that's probably why the little and often works for you, rather than like, oh, I'm going to go into that room all day. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And also it's hard work, and I'm lazy, so I'm pretty dry after an hour and a half. I'm done.
Right. So you feel like you've kind of done your burst on the page. That's away, back into real life. Hopefully something in real life is going to give you something for tomorrow. Is that kind of how
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay, very good. I do think people completely underestimate the sort of solitariness of writing. People think, you just do it in cafes and order another cappuccino. I mean, I don't think that's true. But one thing that I think that people don't understand about writing in terms of talking about mental health is how much you carry those characters in your head, and sort of they can invade into your day-to-day life, or just make you short of attention for the present moment. Do you find that, or are you pretty easy to switch on and off?
No, my family would say that I'm a total nightmare and I never hear anything that anybody says to me. But I'm not. I think I might just be really absent-minded. I don't think I'm deep in the intricacies of a plot.
Right.
I'm just very vague.
Do you think that's, I mean, are you just saying that about yourself in general rather than writing hasn't exacerbated that, or?
Oh gosh, it's hard to know. Perhaps it has. I've been doing it for a long time. So my children have never known me as anything apart from vague, the poor things.
And are you working on something now? How's that going?
Yes, I am. It's something a little bit different. So it may not actually be wanted by the publisher. They like it if you stay in your lane, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
And I sort of tried to write something set in New Zealand, but not our New Zealand. It's the New Zealand that we might have if we'd been sort of overtaken by a fundamentalist dictatorship 40 or 50 yeyears ago.
Ah, so it's dystopian.
Yes-ish. I mean, it's certainly not. It's not horribly grim or anything. But it's been fun to write. But it's really hard to do something like that and stay consistent and think about what people's attitudes would be now if things had changed that long ago. Yeah, I'm playing with it, but I don't know if it's good enough.
It's kind of speculative fiction then, and is that because you're world building, as it were, whereas your other body of work is set kind of in the here and now.
Yeah, it was. I think I started it because it made the plot easier. I didn't want there to be too much technology and cell phones and able to get around and stuff. It just made a couple of scenes easier. And then of course I think I've bitten off a little bit more than I can chew because you think, oh, that'll be fine. I'll just have it that they don't do. That they don't have phones and they don't have the internet, and then but then what? There's a lot of ramifications. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. So is that's going to be for adult readers, or is it a YA novel, or?
Adult readers.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, I haven't got it to the stage where I think it's good enough to show the publisher just yet. So, and then that's another whole bridge to cross whether she thinks it's any good.
I must just tell you a lovely little lockdown story, just a sort of personal connection. Just as lockdown was happening and, there were sort of bulletins on the radio and, it came across that the Auckland library had closed, and it's like, better get down to our library as quickly as possible, which I did, raced down, grabbed a few books, including your one, which I thought couldn't have had a more ironic title, When It All Went to Custard. And it had, and I really enjoyed sort of reading that through a tough time. And I kind of want to finish on a lovely fangirl quote from, I think it was Sam Brooks said this in the spin-off, talking about your books and your writing, is that Danielle presents the world with the crusts off. which I think take to mean that it is real life and everything, but it's just a wee bit more delicate and a wee bit more sort of refined, as it were, in that it's enjoyable and there's the kind of the happy ending. You know, it's like a lovely afternoon tea. What's your response to that?
Well, actually, when I read that, I was a little bit offended. So your take on it is nicer than mine, and my first gut reaction was, far out. Why is it that only things that are miserable can be realistic? You know, somebody who writes the thing about the, you know, rape by the uncle and the hideous abuse, well, that's gritty and real, but writing about people who quite like each other and end up happily isn't real. Thought, well, it is.
But also, if you think of Pretty Delicious...
So that's me being defensive.
Right. Well, yeah, it's interesting, though, that I didn't take it like that at all. But also, let's think about the plot of Pretty Delicious Cafe, which I just reread recently. And that, I mean, you know, Leah faces some big challenges in that, doesn't she? In the sense that, I mean, she's got the everyday life of just, you know, co-running a cafe and being absolutely just physically exhausted about the day-to-day gruel of that. Nothing glamorous there. But also because she's got, without giving away too much, but she's essentially got a bit of a stalker. And, you know, the situation gets quite serious near the end, doesn't it?
It does. And I don't know, is that a crusts off book? I'm not sure.
A what book?
Is that a crusts cut off sort of a book or not?
Well, I think the sense of family in there is very comforting.
Yes, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
And I do. I would very much like people to read something about people that they think, oh gosh, I wish I knew those people. You know, they look like fun.
They're
nice.
Yeah, actually, I'd agree with that. That they're kind of, a lot of them are the friends you haven't met yet. Yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, excellent, Danielle. Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Do you have any just overall general comment about sort of the romance genre of the here and now, you know, contemporary romance?
Goodness, I don't think so. It's such an enormous genre, isn't it? Genres are such tricky things. Personally, I like things out of every genre, but it's more about the individual writing than it is about whether they happen to be fantasy or romance or mystery. Or so I've always found it a little bit of a funny way to divide things. Although it's fair enough, you've got to divide them some way.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it's sort of gone out of favour now, but, you know, in my day, sort of chick lit was the stand-in kind of label for romance, wasn't it? I think romance has broadened out now. You know, I think there's a bigger range of books, different types of romance. It certainly doesn't have the slightly, you know, like talking about an Essie Summers day, they were just books for women. And, you know, there was a kind of a sort of a second tier, I wouldn't say second class, but kind of, you know, different view on them. Whereas I think it's much more accessible and much more contemporary and much broader now.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that's really, really nice, because it certainly used to be the case that if a man wrote a book all about families and communities and relationships, it was sort of greeted as a wonderful expose of the human condition. And if a girl writes just the same book, then it gets a pink cover with glitter on it, and it's chick lit, and you're like.
And a man with his kind of maybe his shirt slightly off or wielding an axe. I mean that. I don't mean that. No, I mean that in a chopping wood kind of way. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, look, thank you so much, Danielle. Lovely to talk to you. All the best with your next project. We really look forward to reading that when it comes out. And, yeah, good luck with your life up in the King Country. Thanks for talking to us down south.
Thank you. Lovely to chat. See you later.
And that's our lovely show. See what I did there? I'm Beverly Martens. Thanks for listening. Catch you next month. Goodbye.
What do you want to be when you grow up? They say you are what you read, and the university bookshop can help you be whoever you want to be. Do you want to be an athlete? Then sit down with an inspiring sports biography. Do you fancy yourself as a detective? We have a grisly lineup of murder mysteries waiting just for you. Do you aspire to be the world's greatest chef? We have cookbooks to tantalise your taste buds. Do you want to celebrate your inner child? Play up in our fabulous children's room. The University Bookshop, helping you decide what you want to be when you grow up.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.